Yeah, so welcome back after the break. One question that was asked is a question in regards to the areas of resource on the prophetic. And one of the things I thought I'd mention was that in terms of the prophetic, if you go to Google Scholar and put in just biblical prophecy and words like that, you'll find quite a lot of scholarly resources there that you can work with, and you can choose which time period you work with there. So if I go to Google Scholar, and then if I put in, say, prophecy, and then Bible, and then one of the things I thought interesting was ministry discernment. Over on the left-hand side, you can see custom range. And so you might just get books and resources in the last 10 years. And so that would strengthen your assignment. And then there's a whole heap of resources there. But obviously, you could look at prophecy and Bible, and then there'd be a lot of resources. Notice on the right-hand side, it tells you whether you can access them. Sometimes the ones that don't have access to, you'll find that you can still look at them there. One of the things that I thought was interesting, you've got the biblical study of what prophecy is about, but you've also got practical application. And so I felt ministry calling discernment was an area in which many Christians are interested in. And I found a resource here, ministry within the context of Pentecostalism, ministry within the context of different ministry contexts, practical application, Afro-American. So there's lots of resources there if you're interested in doing study in that particular area. And I'll put some resources relating to today's notes. I want to have a look now at a video by Dr Aaron Chalmers down in Adelaide in South Australia with Tabor College, and he's put together quite a valuable 3/4-hour video on the Old Testament prophets, which he studied, but also the question of their application to today. And so he asks, what can the Old Testament prophecies tell us in application today? And Chalmers says that one common approach to prophecy by many is to see it as aligning with contemporary events of our times. And so he looks at some churches in the US or elsewhere where they're saying, if you go along to a prophecy conference, they'll tell you that this weekend you'll find out who the Antichrist is, you'll find out when the world's going to end, and all of those details. However, Chalmers says that's just one approach to prophecy, which is to give you the details of what's going to happen. And he says this is prophecy about the distant future, 2,500 years from when the prophet lived, so from the time of the prophet. Can anyone see the logical problem of that? So Jeremiah is sitting there, the Assyrians and Babylonians march down, they're destroying the nation, and Jeremiah thinks, I might just write a few notes here about what's going to happen in Australia. They haven't discovered it yet. But in 2,500 years' time, I'll write down that these are going to be the events that will happen in Australia in 2,500 years' time, or the US of A, which also hadn't been discovered then. I'll write down what's going to happen in the USA in 2,500 years' time. It is probably the least of Jeremiah's concerns at that time. Jeremiah is most concerned about the Babylonians, the Assyrians, and those things that are happening, isn't he? Yeah. Any thoughts on this sort of prophecy prediction?
Prediction on specific dates. I think that probably can be quite.
Yeah.
And different main groups or people do that. Making new dates or something like that. And so
yes.
really not a identity sustenance, and I think sometimes can be a number of cases of pride going, we can figure out what it is instead of a humility going.
Yeah.
And the obsession of actually going, why would this property be important rather than just going, this is what's going to happen, and actually going, well, like the reasons behind being property, things like that.
Yeah, I think you say it very well, in that there are certain psychological motivations as to why, if you've got a small church group of 100 people, to say that we are the only people in the world who know what is going on, then that leads to a certain gnosis, pride and excitement about we're the unique group. And I think it's tempting for all groups, whether they be Catholic, Anglican or whatever, to say we are the unique group who have the unique knowledge. It gives a sense of identity, it makes you feel good, elevates, but it doesn't necessarily fit logically with what's going on. Any thoughts?
I mean, no, well, it says in the Bible, like 40 hours a day.
Yep.
But but I think it also says in the Bible about like like to be away from there. So putting aside things and having like people get prepared is good.
Yep.
But we should focus on the time because preparing for business times.
Yeah. And I think there's two things we need to know more of. We need to know more of the prophet's time. And a lot of us don't know much about the Assyrians or the Babylonians 600 BC. And so that's just not part of our life. And so one thing we need to know more about the prophet's time. The other thing that I think we need to know more about is we need to know more about our own time. That is, if there are crises out there, we need to know more about them. And one of them they tell us at the moment is global warming. We had a student here at Heritage College who came from Tuvalu, and there are certain Australian government organisations allowed them to dig up the phosphate and such forth and to sell it. But unfortunately, that lowered the size of the island and the water levels were rising. And he'd married and he had kids. And the government wisely said to him, and he came to Heritage College to study, you've got to go back to Tuvalu. And he said, well, I can't go back. It's underwater because you took all the land. And they said, it's all right, your kids can stay here because they're Australian and other family members, but you can't. You come from Tuvalu. So I think there are crises all around us. And I think we don't know enough about our own time and the real crises that are out there. And so I think sometimes to say the Antichrist is, etc., is to focus on aspects that we don't fully understand. And there are Antichrist principles and ungodliness and injustice. We need to understand those in ancient times and in our own times. And that's what Aaron Chalmers, in his little video there that I'll put up for you, is talking about. And you can always Google it, Dr. Aaron Chalmers, what the Old Testament prophets can tell us about today, and go to video, and he'll look at that as an illustration. If I was to think about the ancient times and the Assyrians and the Babylonians, and then if I was to read the Bible, and if I was to ask the average person going to church this weekend, would they be getting more information about the meaning of the Antichrist from Channel 7, Channel 10, Channel 9, or would they be getting it from their archaeological knowledge of the Assyrians and Babylonians? I mean, most people are getting 99% of their information from today. And that's why I think they interpret the book of Ezekiel and the book of Isaiah, etc., as it's all about Russia and the China. Well, it was Russia 10 years ago, now it's about China. Because that's what our world is filled with. That's what our heads are filled with, isn't it? And that's what Aaron Chalmers says on his, being a scholar there, but also associated with the Pentecostal Church. He says that it's not about predicting details of the future. That is, there are people today who have an interpretive framework which is based on their experience, which is watching telly, reading newspapers, magazines. That's how they find out about the world around them. And so they go there to find out what the Bible is saying. And they interpret that the Bible, 600 BC, was really talking about Queensland in 2021 AD. And that is a big stretch to be making that connection. For example, Aaron Chalmers says, the 4 beasts in Daniel. And so you got 4 beasts coming out of the water, and then the 4th beast. Melanchthon, at the time of Martin Luther, says it was the Muslim Turks, because they're getting quite active around 1500 AD. So he said the beasts are really the Muslim Turks. While Luther, he said it was the Roman Catholic Church down in Rome. In Adam Clarke's commentary, he too said it was the papacy, and he said the papacy came to an end in 2016 AD. So 6 years ago, Rome came to an end. And Hal Lindsey, late great Planet Earth, he wrote, and it's quite attractive. People are drawn to this, but that's not necessarily the best way to interpret. And then in the book of Daniel, you've got the beast with the head of gold, and you've got the shoulders of silver, etc. It goes on to say that these are the 4 empires, Assyria, Babylon, Greece, and Rome. So it actually says there what it is. But many people today would say, no, it's China and it's Russia and those sorts of things. However, Aaron Chalmers says the principles are still much the same. That is, bad government, bad things happen. Good government, good things happen. Prayer, doing the right thing, following God, blessings will come. Aaron Chalmers points out another way that we can interpret the prophets, and that is as social reformers. And so I think that has a lot of appeal. And as Chalmers says, Amos is clearly concerned with affliction of the righteous. And we read Isaiah chapter 1. That is, if you seek justice, then blessings will come. But if you do injustice, problems will come. And I think that's true in Australian government. If the government look after people, blessings will come. But if the government look after just a few wealthy people, eventually the Australian people will get restless, or the native people, different ones are going to get restless. So Chalmers says, while social reforming can be too narrow, it's true that it is important, social, economical, political, but at the same time, prophets are also concerned with theological and spiritual concerns as well. Now, another way of understanding the prophets is it's all about Jesus. We said before, sometimes you can use that as your answer. However, only about 2% of, say, Isaiah is about Jesus, about God's going to raise up a Messiah and a leader. A lot of Isaiah is about what God is doing back at that time, in ancient times. And so it's important that we understand these different references. For instance, in 2 Kings 18 and in Isaiah 37 to 39, we have King Sennacherib the Assyrian who's coming down, and then Isaiah the prophet speaks that the Babylonians are coming down. And he says, yes, they'll take away 10 or 11 of the northern tribes, but the tribe of Judah will survive. And so King Hezekiah hears it, he repents, he tears his clothes. And so this is in Kings, but it's also in Isaiah. So it's about the history of the time. And for this reason, Aaron Chalmers says, we need to know more about the events of the time. So if you want to become a great Old Testament scholar, then do a master's, learn your Hebrew, learn about these things. We need more good Old Testament scholars, but then you've got to make a choice. You might want to have another career in another area. But I think all of us can learn a little bit. And if you can't learn so much about this, you can go to a commentary. And there are good Bible-based commentaries written by good scholars. And even these days, some of them are free. So if you put in soniclight.com, Book of Isaiah, there's a whole commentary there that you can read. So I would suggest Sonic Light and Thomas Constable. He has written a commentary on Isaiah, and you can read that there, and that'll give you all of this background information. If you're going to preach and speak, then I would suggest you might use a commentary like that. Now, some people, if they preach and speak to a youth group or church, they choose a different book of the Bible to do every week. They might do Genesis one week and Isaiah another week and Matthew another week. It's going to be very hard to get very knowledgeable about the whole of the Bible if you jump around like that. I would suggest often it's a good idea to choose a book of the Bible like Isaiah and say, next 6 months, that's where I'm going to be working. And so you might start with Romans in the New Testament, maybe a gospel in the New Testament, do about 6 months or more in each book. And that'll be good for you, and it'll be good for the people that you talk and preach and communicate to. So dictionaries, commentaries, yep.
Sorry to interrupt. Just wondering about a literary approach to prophecy.
Yeah.
And, I've sort of been learning about this idea of type scene.
Yes.
And if there are those kind of conventions within prophecy that maybe I haven't read his other book yet, but Alter identifies.
Yeah.
And, that particular patterning that can occur, which would be very relevant for application today, where we can see these similar patterns happening in our world, relating back to that, like the literary approach. I was just wondering if there's anything there.
Certainly we're talking about metaphor and in poetry, metaphor. So can I get everyone to write down a metaphor that really speaks to you? So can everyone write down, there's a metaphor. So what is a metaphor that speaks to you? And then I could write one, but can I get you all to write down a metaphor that speaks to you? And then let's have a look at some of these metaphors. I'm thinking of a couple that really speak to me. Do you want to start us off? What would be a metaphor? Just, it could be any metaphor, an image that might speak to you. And then I think Robert Alter would say that these metaphors have meaning. And then also, I think psychologically, I mean, light means something, dark means something. The thoughts? What's a metaphor?
Oh, what is it?
No, what's an example? Tell us something, an image, a picture. Or while you're thinking of it? Right, there's a metaphor. Does that speak to you? Yeah, right. The elephant. I want to write a children's story about an elephant in which the parents are walking past a zoo, and the parents see that they have little toy elephants for sale, but the child sees that there's a big sign, "We have too many elephants, we'll give one away." And the child says to the parents, "Could we have one of those elephants to take home?" Oh, yeah, sure. And then the next picture on the page is that the child is walking along with an elephant on a piece of rope behind them. That's the elephant in the room, isn't it? It's, fits with what you're saying. Yeah. So I think that's a metaphor, and I think that plays. Children's books will often use this. If you come across in children's books, a whale, you overfeed a goldfish, it becomes bigger than your house, all this sort of thing. So children's books often play with the idea of size. And so I think that's something powerful in that metaphor of an elephant. Size, it's big. And David and Goliath, I think, along what Matthew's saying, is playing with the idea of size. Goliath is big, David's small. And so God is on the side of small people, and nations are small nations. So that's a good one. Any thoughts? Yeah. So walking encyclopedia. So carrying knowledge. Is that what you're saying? Yeah. So good. Any metaphors that stand out? Yeah, that sounds good. And what about Michaela? Do you have any pictures or images that stand out here? So that's one part of the literary approach, is the images and stories. And in the prophetic books, we've got, say, water and fire Yeah.
Kanye West just dropped an album, and a really good piece of imagery was having one of his artists sing about like, Father, hold me close, I can walk on water. And then like, please don't let me drown. Wonderful context. But yeah, walking on water.
Yeah, and you too, being partly Christian but partly a popular group, they'll use this. And of course, musicians often are working with metaphors, doing literary approaches. But as Matthew said, type scenes sometimes go bigger than this. You can have a wedding type scene, or you can have a coronation type scene. And so they're, valuable elements there. Matthew, any thoughts on type scenes or metaphors?
I like, when I'm thinking about ancestry, just the tree as a metaphor.
Yes.
And
yes.
Become the family tree. It's so entrenched now.
Wow.
It's almost synonym, where we call it.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. So you've got a synonym there of the word family tree. And I was thinking Psalm 1 has got the tree, fruitfulness, and we use metaphors all the time. That is, we pray you have a fruitful journey. You have fruitful years ahead of you. I mean, we're not wanting apples and oranges to grow on you as you go ahead. The metaphor is very much a part of our language all the time. And so you're very correct there. The prophetic books are constantly using literary approaches and devices in that which they do. And so Jeremiah 17, 1-5, you will lose the heritage I gave you. A fire is kindled that will burn forever. Now, Aaron Chalmers points out the word forever there means it will surely burn, because it won't burn forever, because they'll be restored after 70 years. So we have to be careful that we understand the meaning of the words, and we also have to understand the big picture, the whole book, what it's talking about. So it's not just judgment, but it's judgment and restoration. It's like the prodigal son. It's not just about the prodigal son going astray. It's about the whole message that's there. So metaphors and images are central to these prophetic voices. Now, there can be problems with approaches where, in the desire to emphasize the relevance of the text, that is, Isaiah is all about today, they can make the text irrelevant. And so I think some churches, if you're just going to say it's all about today, you can miss out on what the text is all about. So I'll put some resources up with the notes. Prophecy is often intuitive. It comes from deep within, but the biblical prophecy is different to the other prophecy that we see. Can we have a look now at the book of Isaiah? So let's go to the book of Isaiah. And first of all, I'll put some slides together. I've also put on Moodle a video that you can watch of the Bible Project. So if you go to Bible Project, and then if you go to Bible Project and Isaiah, you've got the first half of the book and then the second half of the book, and then you'll be able to go through the Bible Project book of Isaiah, and that will give you give it to you there, and you'll be able to watch the Bible Project on the book of Isaiah, and then the book will be explained. Now, one of the things that you see in the book of Isaiah is the structure of the book breaks down into a number of different sections. So I'll put this up on Moodle. And so if you go to the Moodle page, you'll be able to find the different sections in this week. And then I've got the resources here, Bible Project resources for Book of Isaiah, chapter 1 to 39, and then 40 to 66, and then each of the prophetic books. And these are great 7 to 9 minute summaries of the book of Isaiah and the other books. Now notice the book of Isaiah is in two halves. The first half of the book of Isaiah is judgment. If you do the wrong thing, then problems will come. But if you do the right thing, there'll be blessings that will come, and there'll be hope that you will have. So the book of Isaiah, chapter 1 to 39, is about judgments that are coming. And the second half of the book is about the promises and hopes that are coming. Interestingly, scholars tell us that Isaiah, now how many people have looked at Isaiah before and found that the book of Isaiah the prophet probably wrote the first half of it, chapters 1 to 39. However, when you come to chapter 40, you then suddenly jump about 100 years into the future, and the language is a little bit different. So it's possible that Isaiah 40 to 66 is written by a student or son or grandson or someone who develops it. So two possibilities. One is Isaiah could write the whole book and he could jump and see 100 years into the future. Or the other possibility is that the first half, Isaiah 1 to 40, is written by Isaiah, and then after that we have the next person writes the chapters 40 onwards. And in between these, we have the exile in Babylon for about 70 years. So the first 40 chapters is warnings. If you do the wrong thing, judgment is coming. And then after that, you find blessings. If you do the right thing, then you'll come back from Babylon and God will restore the people after Babylon. So that's the book of Isaiah. We've also got here Isaiah 40 to 66, the second half of the book, which I really like because that's really positive and cheery. And so the second half of the book, again, Bible Project, and in the first half of the book, you've got the judgment coming, the Assyrians are coming, the Babylonians are coming, tough times are coming. And then in the second half of the book, after the 70-year exile, when they've all been carried away into exile, we read Isaiah 40, comfort my people. So let's have a look at some chapters in Isaiah. So firstly, let's go to Isaiah 6. And I love chapter 6, because in chapter 6, Isaiah is called by God. And I think this is one of the most powerful. You've got Jeremiah chapter 1, called by God. You've got Ezekiel chapter 1 to 3, called by God. And here in chapter 6, in the year that King Uzziah died, Isaiah hears the word of the Lord, and then God sends an angel to touch him on the lips, and then his guilt is departed. He's now able to be a messenger for God. One of the things that Aaron Chalmers says is that in many ways, a prophet is an envoy or a messenger or a communicator of God's message. So they're not just predictors of the future who sit with a crystal ball. They are rather agents communicating God's message. Now notice in verse 9 of chapter 6, these people, they'll keep listening, not understand. They keep looking, do not understand. Their mind is dull. Their ears are closed. Their eyes are closed. They don't look. And you may have seen the monkeys like this as well. And you may think these are your little brothers and sisters who don't listen, don't look, etc. Can anyone tell me, where have you also seen this passage here from Isaiah 6? Listening, not understanding. In the New Testament, who speaks like this in the New Testament?
Jesus.
Jesus says, when he speaks in parables, and people say, why do you speak in parables? He says, because I'm challenging people. They need to think more deeply. These parables get them thinking more deeply. A bit like the idea of fraught with absence of details, get them thinking more deeply. So there's going to be a time where the plant will be cut back. There'll be nothing but a stump left, but then it can grow again. Now, of course, Isaiah chapter 7 is one of the really challenging passages, because it speaks here in Isaiah 7 that King Ahaz is challenged by God. Ask for a sign. I'll give a sign. Verse 11 of chapter 7. And then Isaiah says, "Hear, O Israel, why do you weary God? God is wanting to give you a sign. A virgin or a young woman will be with child and will bear a son, and you will call him God with us." Now, this is what you were saying before, Sam, is that there's a principle here. God wants to raise up a leader in which his presence is in the leader, and he can be a great leader. And he could even, a virgin could bring forth and give birth to a son, and this could be God with us, amongst us. And of course, probably in the time of Isaiah, this is talking about the son of Ahaz. But looking forward, it has more complete fulfillment when Jesus comes, born of a virgin, there as well. And there could be others, Roman kings could think they're the great leader, etc. So that's chapter 7. And then chapter 9 is where the name of the one who is coming is going to be Mighty God, one with us. And so the people who walked in darkness have seen a great light. Here's a great prophetic word, isn't it? Though sometimes we feel we walk in darkness, we can't get our assignments completed. Then we discover the library and there comes a great light. And so even your journey can be a bit like that. There can be up and down times that we've got to work with. Verse 6, a child's been born to us, a son given. So in ancient times, people looked to a king who would be raised up, who would be a wonderful counselor. And then the writer gets really carried away. The king can be Mighty God, Everlasting Father, Prince of Peace, his authority will increase. And so this fits with what we were saying before, is that the prophecy can grow and grow. So that's Isaiah chapter 9. Isaiah takes a real change when we come to chapters 36 through to 39. All the judgment passages have now passed, and then there is a short 4-chapter. The Assyrian is coming, and Hezekiah cries out to God. Isaiah the prophet says, pray, speak to God, and God will answer. And so God does answer, and then the Assyrians all have a plague spread amongst them, and they all flee and run away. And so because you've prayed, then the Lord speaks. He's going to restore them. And this gives great hope to all people, I think. When you read this, you realise there's times in your life when a subject doesn't get passed or something happens, but God is still with you and he's wanting to work things out for good, isn't it? And I think this can apply to every person who ever lives, that at times we face difficulties, things don't go so well, but if we trust in God, look to God, then he's able to restore us. And this applies to nations as well. And so in verse 36, the angel of the Lord struck down 185,000 of the Assyrians. They all had a disease goes through or something, and then they left and went home, and the nation of Judah survived. And life can be filled with big, challenging moments like that. And then in Isaiah 40, we then read about how after the 70 years of captivity, then there is the positive message of hope. Comfort my people now. So they've been in captivity, and now after their time in captivity, they can come back. Notice the literary passages there that Matthew was talking about. Sometimes you feel as though you're in the wilderness, and God can raise up a voice of one crying out in the wilderness. Sometimes when a king comes, you need to build a highway. They're doing that between here and the Gold Coast, aren't they? Building a highway now. So maybe they're getting ready for the Olympics or the coming of some British monarch or something. So they make a straight road. Every valley will be lifted up. Every mountain will be made. And we know that metaphorically, this really speaks about when Jesus comes, then wonderful answers to our needs come. So that's Isaiah chapter 40 through to 66 is the positive message of hope that follows on the message of judgment. So we're going to stop there and take a short break for about 5 to 7 minutes. So a bit early with our 12 o'clock break. Let's make it a short break of about 4 to 5 minutes, and then we'll come back and have a look further at prophets and literary understanding